about... Julian's actually going to talk about his experience with Ovinogeddon, the tournament in Milan that happened a couple weeks ago. We're also going to touch on Bazaar of Moxen, as well as the upcoming Eternal Weekend, which will include the Vintage and Legacy champs.
Yeah, so first of all, I think not every one of our listeners actually knows what Ovinogeddon is. This year, Ovinogeddon already had its 9th installment, and it's the second largest privately organized Eternal Weekend in all of Europe, after Bazaar of Moxen. This year it attracted about 470, 480 people just for the Legacy main event, which is pretty big, but obviously not as close to Grand Prix or Bazaar of Moxen, but yeah. It's situated in Milan and is notorious for being delayed. Like, every time I went to Ovinogeddon, when they told you the tournament starts at 9 a.m., you knew, okay, you don't have to show up until 10 or even 10:30 because it's never going to start at 9 a.m. So this year, they actually went ahead and they said, okay, the main event is going to start at 11 a.m. because everybody knew it would never start before that.
So then it started at like 6 p.m. the next day, right?
6 p.m. the same day was when the third round finished.
Are you fucking kidding me?
See, I was going to make a joke about making the trains run on time, but that's ridiculous.
Yeah, but that's what we don't get them for you.
It's the European lifestyle.
Was there
Let's
a
say it's the
2-hour
Italian
siesta?
lifestyle.
Like, in between, they're like, okay, guys, go get lunch, take a nap. We'll come back for round 3 at 5 p.m.
I think there were several issues. The first one was they didn't expect as many people. Like, it grew over the years, and when I was there last time, it was already pretty crowded, but this time it was just too crowded. It took so much time to just get people seated and pairings on and whatever, so there was a lot of time lost in between rounds, and I don't know, maybe they didn't like input the results right away, but I think that's not the important part. The important part, because I talked to the organizer later, Stinfo, and he's a really nice guy, and I think he really wants to have this tournament happen and not be delayed like forever. But he told me, so because they had buys at the tournament, like 1 or 2 round buys, he contacted Wizards, and Wizards told him, okay, in order to get the advanced DCI reporter that can handle buys, you have to meet some criteria. Like, you have to promote this tournament like so and so many weeks in advance and whatever. He met all of these criteria, and he called Wizards, and the Wizards guy responsible for Italy just told him, meh. So he was like, so how am I supposed to handle the buys? And he was like, okay, you're just gonna use an Excel list. And he was like, no, I can't do that. So in the end, that was his only option. And because they had several trials in all of Europe, there were some things that didn't really work out. So after the first round and after the second round, people showed up and were like, hey, man, what the fuck? I had a buy. I had 2 buys. Why am I not in the pairings? So after the third round, it caused a huge problem, and there were a lot of people that had 1 buy that were just upgraded to 2 buys because they were forgotten in the earlier process. So after the third round, everything was so fucked up, they actually had to stop, cancel, and recreate the entire tournament in the DCI reporter, manually repair everybody against the guy he had played before, and input the result. So if you see it, so he had like,
I don't know about you. I think I would have left.
Yeah,
I
a lot
just
of
want
people
to
actually
stop
left.
recording right now. This explanation is making me want to vomit. I mean, this is insane. Like, I can't imagine being there.
Yeah, you had like 230 tables, and you had to repair everybody for 3 rounds and input the results. So it's yeah, we had an actual like 2.5 hour delay, and nobody really knew what was going on. So when there was like a half-hour delay, you were like, yeah, okay, that's Italy, no problem. Like after a 1 hour delay, you felt fucked because why didn't I go to grab some pizza? So at some point, they announced that there was a huge problem, and we should just wait some more. I even took a picture on my phone. It was like close to 6 p.m. and the 4th round had not started. And this tournament was supposed to be 10 rounds with top 8. So like in the end it would be 13
awful.
rounds. Yeah, so what they did, because that was not going to happen, they cut the tournament to 9 rounds and instead used top 16.
What?
So I mean, you can do that, but it's still fucked up because your prices somehow don't match then, because I went 7-2 and I didn't get a prize, even though 7-2 or 8-2 should definitely have gotten a prize, but my tiebreakers were not good enough. I mean, for me, okay, at least the tournament got to finish somehow, But we had the same kind of problem the day before because they had a big trial and we played, I think, 7 rounds. And the Swiss finished at like 1 a.m. and they wanted people to play for the second buy, which the finalists would have gotten, until like 3 in the morning. And everybody was like, no, I'm not going to stay until 3 in the morning. So they offered a split. And everybody who actually wanted to buy would stay, but everybody just left. And the split was also pretty bad. Like, everybody got 80 euros, but the entrance fee was 20 euros, and there were 90 people. So you had, like, I'm stupid, 1,800 euros. And the top 8, everybody got 80 euros. So if you multiply that by 8, you arrive at 640 euros with a cash pool of 1,800. So even though I know that you have some money you're going to use for logistics and whatever,
€1,200 down seems pretty
yeah,
fucking awful.
if every time you're giving out less than 50%, there's not even, you can't even discuss it. It's just fucked up. And I told Stinfo, and he told me that the stream was so expensive, like 100 euros for the stream and whatever, but the stream, that gets divided by all the tournaments. It's not the big legacy trial that has to fuel the stream. So, yeah,
Let's
but
put it this way: the only time that you can say that you have less than 50% payout, because I understand like the cost of things are expensive. Like the only time that I would see that is acceptable as you're playing for a tournament when you know that the surroundings, like you're playing in like a black tie legacy tournament or a black tie vintage tournament, where you're paying for like catering or alcohol or whatever, and you know that the prize is just posterity. Like that's okay.
Or a PTQ where you're winning a flight to Hawaii and a couple days of free hotel room.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the biggest problem was that he didn't expect 90 people to show up on Friday. Or was it even Thursday? I don't even remember. And he didn't, like, because there were so many people and everything was getting out of hands, he didn't really have the time or the willingness to adjust the prices. Also, he gave out polluted deltas that he probably bought before they were announced as being in kinds of track here. So the price took a dive, and it just didn't match. Like, from the very beginning, there were problems, and even though I really have to say everybody involved with Ovinogeddon was very helpful, and the judges were highly competent, but overall, it just didn't really work. So, coming back to the Legacy main event, because there's just too much small stuff to talk about. Like, for example, they had to add tables on the outside. So, if you lost the first or second round, you probably would have to play on the outside. And when you were playing on the outside, you didn't even know when the round was starting, when time was announced. Like, I was watching this Miracles Mirror, and I was highly fascinated by it. And at the very end, somebody comes around and is like, "Hey, guys, why didn't you give me your results slip?" And he was like, "Hey, come on, we just finished." And he gives us a look and is like, "You just finished? Time was announced like 25 minutes ago." And they were like, "Time?"
Yeah, I really think that there's sometime soon, because we've started hearing so many stories of bad TOs. Sometime soon, there's going to start being rules in the tournament rules that are just going to be like, you have to have your event be indoors. You have to have at least 1.5 feet of space for each person, because of stuff like this where it's like, oh, too many people showed up, so we just play outside, and we're not going to send any judges out there. It's ridiculous. Before you go into the rest of the problems, though, I'll ask you, for you, about how much does it cost just to go to this event, and would you go again for that cost?
First of all, I would always go again, because it's like one of those big legacy or eternal happenings in Europe. It's like the second biggest, as I mentioned, after Bazaar of Moxon, and I get to meet all my friends from all of Europe. And yeah, so I would go again, even though the organization has been bad, but I knew it would be bad. Like, it's always bad when you go to Ovinogeddon, but that's kind of part of it. It was just really bad this year, and I hope it's gonna be better next year. I'm gonna talk to them, maybe get a new venue or something. Money wise, I think, what did I pay? I think I paid 40 euros for the card ride, and then like 20 euros, 25 euros per night. So overall, I paid like 150, 160 for the ride and accommodation.
Okay, I guess that's not that bad. I'm just thinking, like, to be going out of town for a tournament like that, I guess you're, with it being one of the only big Eternal events, they kind of have an audience that has to go. Kind of like, I mean, I imagine if Eternal Weekend could be a lot worse and you'd still get a lot of people just because it's Eternal Weekend.
Yeah, exactly. So for the Legacy main event, they actually did the cut to the top 16, and they played the round of 16, and then it was like, I think, 1 in the morning, 1:30, I don't know, like close to 2 in the morning. And the tournament organizer wanted people to keep playing. Like, play the round of 8, play the round of 4, play the round, like, the finals. And everybody was like, no, man, we are not gonna play. So, what they did is, once again, they agreed on a split, which was, I think the split for the top 8 was pretty fair, from what I've heard. Like, everybody was happy about it. I think something including 700 euros or something like that. I don't know. And what they did, because they still needed an official winner, is they told everybody, okay, if you still want to play for the top 8, you just show up tomorrow at, I don't know, 10 in the morning, and you're just going to play the top 8. So only 4 people showed up. Because they were like, screw this. Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's still I don't know if there's a oh yeah, you get a trophy. Like, you get a silver magic card. It's completely silver. I think it's not actual silver, but it looks silver and it's pretty heavy.
Silver's not that expensive, so...
Yeah, okay. So, I think it's still too expensive given how heavy this card actually is. And I think that's pretty cool because they give a one out for the Legacy winner, for the Vintage winner, and for the Modern winner. And they used to give one out for the best Eternal player. Like, combined Legacy and Vintage results, you would get the best Eternal Plague, not Plague, Plague. And they didn't do it this year, but that's one of the things that Ovino usually does. So yeah, in the end, my friends Thomas and Angelo, well, they didn't split the final. Angelo won against Thomas, but what they were playing was the exact same 75. It's the exact same 75 that Philipp Schöniger has been putting forward over the last couple of months, and that pretty much everyone in our circle of friends is using right now. What's so interesting to me about this is that Philipp, before the tournament, like 2 days before the tournament, Philipp actually called this exact finals. Philipp told us when we were leaving, hey guys, have fun, good luck at Ovino, but I think you will have to settle for 3rd and 4th place, because Angelo and Thomas will split the finals with my list. And we are talking about a like 470 people tournament, and that's exactly what happened. And it's not like Philipp says this at every tournament. He just said it once, and it actually happened, and that's really amazing to me.
Yeah, but like if it never did happen, you wouldn't worry about it and you'd brush it off. So, I think he just tuned the list, and he's got to read that Miracles is very good. And I mean, there's some data put up even just this morning on the source where
Miracles is still the best deck list. I saw it, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you can see that, I mean, if you just look at the graphs, I mean, Miracles has leaps and bounds more finishes than the next best deck.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Actually, let me look at the data here. October 2014.
Elves, it was Elves, the second best deck.
301 finishes versus 263 for Elves, and then the next highest is 149 for Team America.
Yeah.
That graph drops off, like, exponentially. Like, that's some decay there.
I'm currently working on an article about Miracles. Like, not the deck itself, but its positioning in the meta. And I also checked Magic Online for that. That's why I've got the numbers ready. Of all the decks finishing in the money in daily events on Magic Online that go 4-0 or 3-1, Miracles shares about 15% of all those decks, and the second highest finisher is Blue-Red Delver and Blue-Green Infect, and both of those are at like 5 to 6%, and Miracles is at a fucking 15%.
That's impressive.
I find the constantly doing well of Miracles Online to be really interesting, just because with the chess clock, it's so much harder to finish on time with that deck compared to in real life where you can have 90% of the round be one players.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, even yesterday I hosted the Vancouver Legacy Classic, and the top 8 was Miracles, Esper, Miracles, Painter, something else, Miracle. Like, it was a lot of Miracles, and who came out on top? Miracles with Dig Through Time, because Dig Through Time is fucking busted. Continue.
Yeah. Speaking about the dominance of Miracles, I don't want to like get too deep into that because I think we've beaten that to the death already. There was a big tournament in Spain, the Arcanist 20K, and looking at the top 10, actually, there's also 5 Miracles. It's 5 Miracles, Elves, Dredge, Blade Control, it says, Death in Texas, and a super interesting Elves Fairies hybrid that we should talk about later, but I want to share some cool stories from Ovinogeddon because the tournament was not it's not just all bad. It was actually pretty cool to get to meet all your friends and play in a very big tournament again. So let me start with the misplays, because there were some very interesting misplays and people not being aware of the rules. I've got them written down here. Okay, I think this is pretty basic for everyone playing Vintage. When there's a Chixley Jailer in play and you Snapcaster one of your instant sorceries, if you Snapcaster it after the Chixley Jailer has entered the battlefield, you still get to flashback it. My opponents didn't believe me, the judge didn't believe me, but the head judge ruled in my favor, so yeah. So if you didn't know that, now you know it.
Is that just timestamping / most recent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you Snapcaster Mage and then via, I don't know, Ethervile or something, Chixley Jailer enters play, you can't do it, but yeah. Then Chain of Vapor. This is also relevant for Legacy. It happened in Vintage, but doesn't matter. My opponent casts Chain of Vapor, targeting his Black Lotus, and we both agree that Chain of Vapor resolves now. Okay, so during the resolution he puts the Lotus to his hand, and then he wants to copy it, which is fine, but before copying it, he wants to tap the Underground Sea for mana, and that's too late. Like, you can't pay mana or even add it to your pool when the resolution of a spell is not asking you for it. Like, you can add mana for Transmute Artifact or Mana Leak or whatever, because the spell is actually asking you to pay mana. But Chain of Vapor never asks you to pay mana, so you can't tap the Underground Sea. I mean, this is very, very, like, I don't know how to call it.
It's very minor.
Yeah, it's very minor, but yeah, I think he didn't even know about it, so this was another... I think I've never had as many judge calls as at this event, but they were all ruled in my favor, so I guess I'm fine with that. What else is there? Like, these were not really misplaced, these were rules issues. Oh yeah, so in the very first round of the main event, I played the Elf's Mirror, and at some point, my opponent took a lot of time, like really a lot of time, and to me, I feel like slow play is kind of the big elephant in the room that nobody really talks about, but it's so abundant, and people should really be aware of it and do something against it. So what I did was to actually watch the clock, because I noted when I passed the turn, he spent like 1 minute thinking about his play, doing nothing. He drew the card, and then he sat there for 1 minute. After 1 minute, I told him, okay, you have to make a play now. And he's like, yeah, whatever, I'm gonna make a play soon. Yeah, okay.
That was nice of you after a minute to say something that wasn't the word judge.
Yeah, like after 1 minute and 30, I called a judge, and I told the judge that my opponent has been thinking about for his play for 1 minute and 30. So the judge tells him something in Italian, and the other guy's like, yeah, okay. And of course the judge couldn't stay because the tournament was way too big. And the guy actually makes a play, and it's the wrong play. Like, he was playing elves as well, and I could see how he could kill me, but he didn't do that. Instead, he just attacked for like 13, and I was like, yeah, whatever, man. And I'm pretty sure, had he thought about it for some more, he would have figured it out. But he didn't.
We only needed like 3-4 minutes to figure it out, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like your what you do, it's also time dependent. If you have to take 5 minutes to the same kind of thing that somebody else does in like half a minute, you are worse. And that's not meant as an insult, because there are different tiers of players. You are not there yet. You lack the experience, and that's okay. But the guy, he was pretty pissed about it, and he while sideboarding, he kept telling me that was not slow play. I do not slow play. I think he wasn't aware between the difference. He wasn't aware of the difference between slow play and stalling.
Slowly.
I mean, he obviously wasn't stalling. This was the first game in Elf's Mirror, and there was even, why would you stall there? But
there's a lot going on. It is really what it is, and just sometimes you have to think. But with the tournament rules for slow play, you don't get that option of taking 5 minutes to try and think about your combo.
Yeah.
And that's just the way the rules are. And I think part of the reason that it's the elephant in the room and doesn't get called that much is because in order to not be huge dicks to people, the rules are very wishy-washy. If the rules just said you cannot spend more than X seconds between the resolution of spells, it would be really clear. People would call it all the time. But that's kind of a dick move to people, and I think that's why slow play doesn't get called as much as it could, is because the rules have to be wishy-washy.
Yeah, because you also can't really enforce it.
You know, certain decks just have more complex plays, and you can be doing things and advancing your board state, and that's not slow play. If you are advancing the state of things, and you are, but your turn may take a while, but you may be doing things to move forward. So it starts to get almost impossible to come up with a completely objective way to measure it. Just based on some of the decks and some of the lines of play you might take. You might be proceeding, casting spells at a good pace, but your turn might take, 12 minutes, right? That's not slow play.
Yeah.
Right.
I think nobody can really tell you what's an appropriate amount, like what's an okay amount to take, but everybody can tell you what's not okay. And like 1 minute of doing nothing is not okay, and 1 minute 30 of doing nothing is definitely not okay. Like, I think everybody should just go ahead and call a judge for slow play, or maybe not even call the judge right away, but tell your opponent right away. What I do, I don't just tell them, okay, play faster. I tell them, okay, if you don't make a play, I will have to call a judge soon. Like, be very precise about what you're gonna do if they don't make a play. Otherwise, it feels like harassment. But I think everybody should just make an effort, and when you're playing at a tournament that has one of these clocks, watch it. And once a certain amount of time has passed, just tell your opponent that you will be calling a judge soon. And I think people are also enforcing it more. Like, I've seen it on Star City games, the guy that was disqualified in the top 8 while doing a Liliana split, and I haven't watched the VOD, I don't know how long he took.
90 seconds.
I think 90 seconds is too long. Like, and it feels okay, even though I'm sorry for the guy, to give him... It was actually just a warning. It wasn't even a game loss, but it got upgraded into a warning because he had too many of those slow play warnings. And I think that's okay. I'm sorry for the guy, but it should be a reminder to all of us, not just our opponents, but ourselves, to play in a reasonable pace. And if you're gonna call a judge on me, I'm fine. If I'm playing too slow, I'm sorry. I mean, it happens. It's nothing personal. It can happen to anybody, but don't feel bad when your opponent is calling you out on it.
But a little thing I've seen a couple people do is, if you're going to have something that's going to take a while, is just like calling a judge on yourself. Be like, hey, judge, I'm going to take like 2 minutes to cast a spell, but it's going to be Doomsday. So if I get a judge calling me for slow play, this is why.
Yeah. I had
But
this
even
similar
then, if
situation
you...
at the last Star City, and it was around top activations, and I was playing against sort of a novice explorer Nick Fit player, and I thought about calling a judge. His top activations were 15, 20 seconds, end of turn, his turn. He couldn't remember what he had on top. At some point I probably should have called a judge because I'm playing Enchantress, which can't kill very quickly either. And in the end, it ended up biting me. We drew the game, and I had him, pretty much dead to rights. But had I kept a closer eye on it, I may have been able to pull that game out.
And that's one of those that's got to be very, very frustrating. I could have won if I would have been fiercely enforcing the rules.
Hey, so one interesting thing also is cons was legal for this event, right? And I noticed there was a total dearth of cons cards in the Miracle decks. What did you think about that?
Well, for Miracles, the only option would be to play Dig Through Time or Treasure Cruise, but both fall into the same category as the other Miracles cards. Like, they're highly situational, and they don't do anything on the very first turns. So, what are you gonna cut if you want to incorporate those? Are you gonna cut Chase? Probably not, because Chase is still better. Are you gonna cut Miracles? That's... no.
I have a friend who played Treasure Cruise, and it wasn't Miracles, but it was a blue-white control. It was a Stoneblade shell. And he was telling me after we played that his real problem he was having with it is the best graveyard hit. If you're playing a graveyard deck, you're going to bring in Rest in Pieces, and you're going to play Rest in Peace in a blue-white control deck. Well, if you bring in Rest in Peace, you basically have to bring out Treasure Cruise, and that affects your game plan a lot to take out 4 draw 3s.
Yeah, I
and
think
that was
that's
what he didn't like about it.
that's another reason. Yeah. But I think overall it's just really that you're overloading the deck on situational cards, and there's unfortunately just no space left. Even though I would love to play any of those 2 cards in Miracles, I feel like there's nothing you can do. Like, you won't cut Ponder if you're playing Ponder. You can't cut any of the core cards, because actually there's very little cards in Miracles that actually do something. There's lots of cantrips and library manipulation and cards that draw you into more good cards, but there's little stuff that actually does something, and the stuff that does something is Entreat the Angels, Chase, and Terminus. Even Counterbalance does not do anything on its own. So it's just a deck that can't really handle...
Puts the other guy on tilt, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But
that's not a win condition.
I think you can also argue that, like, if you're playing 4 ponders, you could probably go down to 2 to 3 ponders and still play a Dig Through Time or 2. I mean, an American player came up from, America, and played Miracles with, I think, 2 Dig Through Times in the main, and ended up cutting, I think, shaved down to 3 Plowshares and 3 Ponders or 2 Ponders. and that card in any sort of mirror match was just insane.
Yeah, in the mirror match, okay.
I mean, he won a lot of other matches too, and I mean, this is just one sample size, but I think it's worth trying. He said it was really good, and he enjoyed it in his testing, so...
Yeah, but now you ended up in a position where you actually cut business. If you cut Swords to Plowshares, that's one of your very best business cards. And I know that some people like to cut down to even just 2, and I think those people are insane. But the more you cut the actual business cards, the worse the deck gets, and actually the more prone to variance it becomes. Because you might draw all these awesome draw more cards, but you're not gonna draw the Terminus or the critical Swords to Plowshares for the Infect Elf attacking you. And yeah... That's my problem with those cards in Miracles, but I think there are people more qualified to talk about that, and they will probably do soon, even before Grand Prix New Jersey. So let's look forward to that. I was in the middle of talking about some awesome misplays. So in the 7th round, I was 4-2 with Elves. I was playing against Canadian Threshold, and this is the sequence of plays. My opponent goes first, land, Delver, go. I play land, Quirion Ranger, go. During his upkeep, he plays Brainstorm. He thinks about it, puts 2 cards back, draws a card, plays a land, and attacks me. And he's like, oh.
Oops.
So I didn't block because I really needed the Quirion Ranger and I didn't mind him having the Delver. So on the next turn, the Delver didn't flip as well because he put only a single instant sorcery on top and not a second one. So it didn't flip again. And then it couldn't attack because I had a Deathrite Shaman. And in the end, I won the game on like 4 or 5 lives. So it would have made a difference. And it was just, I don't know. It felt pretty good seeing his face once he made the attack and realized, oh shit, I played Brainstorm in my upkeep to not do anything. And for me it was crazy as well, because when the Delver didn't flip after he played Brainstorm, I was like, okay, what can I know now? Now I know he doesn't have any instant or sorceries in his hand, and so I was like, oh my god, so what does he have? Okay, he's probably got Wasteland. Okay, so he's probably got Goyf, and this.
He
And then I was like,
you by playing out Fugitive Wizard. He next leveled you.
Yeah, so I won the match, and it was not even close, because I think he wasn't very familiar with what he was doing. Not yet, at least. So, for the last 2 rounds, I'm playing against... let's put it that way. I play first, I play a land, he plays a snow-covered mountain. I look at him, and I say, no. And he's like, yes. So what is he playing?
Scred?
Snow-covered mountain.
Yeah.
He's not next leveling you. He's just running the snow-covered mountain.
Yeah, he was playing Burn.
Gifts ungiven, so he could get a mountain and a snow-covered mountain.
Yeah, that would be pretty awesome. No, he was playing Burn. And every time I see snow-covered mountain, I feel Burn. And that's why I said no. And he really picked it up, and he just looked me in the eyes, and he was like, yes. Lava Spike. I still won because apparently he was just playing Grizzly Bears in his deck, and by Grizzly Bear I mean Eidolon that never triggers when you play stuff.
Ah, yes.
So I was pretty dead on board, but I just comboed through Eidolon because YOLO, and it actually worked because he never called a
never said anything? You're just like...
He called a trick. Once I had found the Abrupt Decay, and I Abrupt Decayed the Eidolon just to be safe, he called the trigger. But for everything before that, he didn't call the trigger.
So how did you go about it? Did you just like Query Ranger and you look at him and he just says nothing?
No, you don't.
Like,
You don't look at him, because if you look at him, he feels like he should respond. There's anything you have to play in a way that's like very, very. It's very clear that this spell will resolve. You know, you just put it on the table and say, "Quirion Ranger, draw a card," and he's like, "Okay." And then you wait a second or two, and then you play your next
confidence.
Yeah, you have to put out the confidence.
And your confidence just caused him to forget.
I tried to find a red 2/2 with no text, and there actually isn't any, so I don't have a good joke about what to call that Eidolon.
But I called it a Grizzly Bear, but the mana cost is much easier on Grizzly
Bear. Exactly.
It's a red Grizzly Bear. Goblin Bear? A Gob Bear? A Gob Bear.
I mean, even Ember Hauler would be pretty good in the Elves matchup. At least you could sack it and kill an elf.
Yeah. So I won this. I was 6-2, and the last round was coming up, and I thought at 7-2 I would definitely get prizes, and most people in 7-2 actually got prizes. But Turns out that half of my opponents didn't know what Kratos Behemoth did or Violet Symbiote, so I'm not surprised to have bad tiebreakers. And while I didn't finish in the money, even though I won the last round, and for the last round, I'm playing against land, Goblin Guide, attack, and I'm like, no, not burn again. It actually is burn. But fortunately for me, he also doesn't really like Eidolon. So I play Elfish Visionary, I say draw. He says yes, I draw a card. Then he's like, oh, and you take 2 of Eidolon. I'm no. I think both my opponents were just in this. They were operating in this mode of whatever. Oh no, wait, I have to play too. And I think you can really mislead your opponent in a way that when you're playing very confident that they will miss the Eidolon trigger. It's like I would definitely not draw the card until he gives me the okay. But once he gives me the okay to draw the card of the Elfish Visionary, it's definitely too late for him to actually remember the trigger. And he calls a judge, and the judge rules in my favor. He appeals, the head judge rules in my favor. And to me, these people, they were always like very grumpy about it, and they felt bad. But what I always tell them,
play your deck, man. That's
I want
a requirement to play at a competitive
also,
level.
you're
You need to know how to
playing
play your
burn. I mean, how can you expect anybody to have any sympathy for you when you're encroaching on our gentlemanly game of Magic by casting Lava Spike? You know?
Well, I couldn't tell that to him. Maybe I could have, but what I just told him is, I think, like, I tried to set this as friendly as I could. I believe the better player should win, and the better player is the player who does less mistakes. And you just did a mistake. You just made a mistake, and I think there's
But the
nothing.
thing is, he shouldn't feel bad about it. He should use it as a learning experience, right? Like, he'll probably never forget that Eidolon is a trigger now.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's great. And you know what? There are some times when it's like, you need to lightning bolt that 2/3 Tarmogoyf with no instance in the graveyard to learn about state-based effects.
I won a Grand Prix trial on the back of that, and now everybody at my store remembers their Stoneforge Mystic trigger, or their Batterskull triggers. Which was a total take move for me, but I wanted those buys.
Yeah, I've seen that at Grand Prix Paris. Some guys were playing for day 2, like both were 6 and 2, and the other guy, end of turn, activates Stoneforge Mystic, puts Batterskull into play, untaps, draws a card, plays a land, and moves to attack, and the other guy is like, attack with what? With my Batterskull. But he didn't put a token into play, and that's like, it feels so bad, because, of course he wanted to put the token into play, but he didn't even announce it.
At least that's the nice way to do it. The nice way to do it is go, attack with what? The mean way to do it is call it Judge and go, Judge, my opponent has attempted to declare an illegal attacker. It can't attack.
Yeah, take a GRV on top of your missed trigger, you clown.
I mean, there are some times, though, when you shortcut and you're like, okay, I'm going to untap as I pull my token out of my box to slap on the table.
Like,
you just say something. You can't just have triggers happen without any acknowledgement of
Of
them.
course.
All right.
There's one more interesting. Well, it's not really very interesting. So after the Legacy main event, I played in an 8-man, and in the first round, I'm playing against Ethnicium Tendrils. I believe he wins the first game. I win the second game. And in the third game he goes first. He plays a land and Lotus Petal, and I was like, oh fuck, I'm dead. But turns out he just plays that confident, and I'm still in the game. But in the end, he still probably gets me because he starts. I'm very low because of Bob. I'm like at 12 life or something, and he starts chaining rituals and LEDs, and he's like at Storm 10, and then he starts chaining Infernal Tutors. And even though the first Infernal Tutor could just find Tendrils and kills me, he goes for Infernal for Tendrils. And then I'm like, how much mana do you have left in your pool? Oh, 3 mana.
Oh, wow.
So he lost everything he had and had just a single Tendrils in hand that he couldn't cast. And so he just scooped them up. He could have still played because my board presence was very, very bad. But he felt so embarrassed that he just decided, okay, you move on.
Nope, I've scooped games like that.
Yeah, I can very well
see that. I scooped a game
see
yesterday where I went Grafdigger's Cage, resolves. Snapcaster Mage targeting my Ancestral Recall, and the guy's like, yeah, it resolves.
So one last thing before we move on. In Vintage, and I'm really not a Vintage guy, I just played because I could borrow the cards, and I think I'm not the worst Vintage player. I was playing against this guy, and he was playing stacks. I went oh, he went first. He played something, I don't know. I went first. I played first turn Dark Confident, and then he's like, okay, Dark Confident, that's a pretty cool card. Let me Phyrexia Metamorph that card, and I'm like, okay, I don't know. Don't you play like in my head? Don't you play very expensive cards? Okay, go ahead. Maybe it's good to just copy it once. So he copies it. I do something. I actually don't do nothing on my turn because he plays some spheres or whatever, and then on his turn, he plays another Phyrexia Metamorph, because what's better than 1 Dark Confident? 2 Dark Confident. So he's a Stacks player that has 2 Dark Confidents in play, has used his Ancient Tomb like 2 or 3 times already, and paid mana for the first Phyrexia Metamorph. So all I just do over the entire next 3 turns is just sit there, draw my card, play a land, and say go, and he just awfully dies to his own Dark Confidence, because he reveals Staff of Nim, Karn Silver Golem, another Phyrexia Metamorph, and he used his Pain Lance all the time, so he just dies.
Now, maybe this guy was just really old school, because I'm sure Sean can attest. There used to be Bob Stacks decks. That used to be a thing.
Yeah, there were decks that had all kinds of... It was like 5 color stacks, and they didn't give a damn. They would actually just play Smoke Stacks and Welders and Dark Confidant.
I played 5 color... 5 color stacks was my first Eternal deck, and I didn't play black-red stacks because I didn't want to pay $15 for Dark Confidants.
So yeah, that's my last fun story from Ovino. I think another fun story is beating Miracles with 2 Dryad Arbors after he dropped Blood Moon and pretty much locked both of us out, so I just attacked for 2, attacked for 2, attacked for 2, and it got there, so I guess that's not some way to protect. Yeah, Death by Mountain.
Death
by Mountain Dryad.
And there was not a Koth of the Hammer involved.
Death by Mountain Dryad. That's miserable.
Green Mountain Dryad.
I wasn't able to find the results from the Ovinogeddon Sunday Vintage anywhere on the internet. So they're not on any of the deck sites. The Ovinogeddon site doesn't have them, and they weren't on the Mana Drain, so...
Yeah, that's because they didn't post them. My friend Anton Kolinski actually won. He was playing what he calls Der Burg, and not Die Burg, which would be the correct German way to put it, because he's not playing a regular Burg list. And he won the finals against Tesserator. And if you want to watch the finals, and you should definitely do, because they were awesome, you can go to my webpage, it's Julian.com, and I think that's the only place where you can actually watch the VODs of those finals, because I recorded them on my phone. The quality isn't the best, but you should definitely and at least watch the 3rd game, because the 3rd game was insane. I kept track, and the other guy, the Tesserator guy, had drawn 7 or 8 extra cards by the 4th turn, and Anton hadn't done anything. He literally had not done anything until then, and he still won the game. The other guy even had the win in hand. He had the game-winning Tinker for Voltaic Key in hand, and you could definitely tell that he was afraid to do it into open mana. So instead he played Chase, and it resolved because Anton had nothing. And then Anton untapped into like 5 more mana, Chase, Time Vault in play, and like 7 cards in hand, and he still won. And if you want to know how he won, you should go to itsjulian.com and watch the VODs.
Oh, really? That you're gonna do that?
Yeah. Most of all because...
Let me guess, you got AdWords set up on that website?
No. I don't. Actually, there was not one big play that Anton did. It's just the next 4 or 5 turns, everything came down exactly the way it needed for him to come down. And that's why I can't like spoil something huge that happened. But it really went down the exact same way that only meant that he could win. And that was pretty awesome, because now he won the finals and he got the silver bomb and he paid for the ride. So I was very happy for him because he played really well.
No, that's cool. It's Tesserator is definitely in my gauntlet, and so is so you said he was playing Bug?
Yeah, no, he was a Borg, like black, blue, red, green. Yeah. So one more thing, and then I'm gonna finish about Ovino, because the Vintage event wasn't as delayed as the other events, mainly because Vintage only had 8 rounds and then top 8. And after the semi-finals, which happened at like around midnight, the head judge, who was a pretty cool guy, he just kept sitting there drinking his beer, eating his ramen noodle soup, and after the semi-finals he was like, guys, I'm out of here, you finished this. And it was like, really? Yeah, he really wanted to go home, so the only person with some judge authority left was a pretty, let's say, beautiful Italian girl in a cut-down judge uniform. And I don't know if she was actually a judge, because she just watched, and whenever something happened, me and my friends pointed it out, like when some infraction happened. And she never gave out warnings or whatever. Like, in the semifinals and the finals, people played additional lands, and she didn't realize. So, yeah, we pointed it out, and people took it back, but she didn't issue warnings, and I think that's not right, but yeah.
I've watched a few
That's called
Italian
cheating.
streams where Sphere of Resistance and other mandatory things were quite optional, and like nobody ever pointed them out. It's more laid back over there, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was pretty late in the night, and I believe both were honest mistakes. But I feel like once somebody points it out, at least issue a warning, just because that's the right thing to do. So yeah. Okay, guys, I think I'm gonna leave for now, because first of all, I don't have a lot to add for Vintage. So I guess I'm just gonna say goodbye to everyone and have fun with the other guys, and see you next time.
So I think one thing that will be really, really interesting with this year's Eternal Weekend is between the Vintage Super League and Magic Online, there's been a lot more maybe progress with Vintage in the last few months than there has been probably in quite some time. Would you agree, Sean?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. You just get more results. You still have the sanctioned versus non-sanctioned problem, but I think Magic Online maybe just suffers a little bit from what it's really now Wasteland that's hamstringing deck construction.
How much is Wasteland now?
Wasteland's about 120. It's not just Wasteland. It's some of the things that make the online metagame so interesting is like Wasteland is really expensive. As an example, Tangle Wire was broken for a while, so you couldn't play a Tangle Wire based stacks deck. So as a result, the metagame kind of changes independently, and you start seeing some decks that maybe would never have existed in paper, which I think is really interesting. You might see some of them in paper this coming weekend.
And
So on the flip side, it seems to me that a lot of the kind of people who are going to fly to Philadelphia to play $10,000 decks are not going to be super swayed by what Randy is playing on
Correct.
the Magic stream on Tuesday. They're going to play what they want to play.
Yeah, and the other thing about the Vintage Super League, which it's been great, it's awesome, and I thank them for the free entertainment on my Wednesday and Thursday nights, or as I sit on the freaking exercise bike or something miserable. Is it's a little bit inbred. So I think, the people who are just going to look at the lists and copy them probably don't understand that, or they may not understand that going into a given set of 3 matches, you know who you're going to play against. So, doing something like running 4 main deck Pyroblasts, and almost no Dredge hate is fine there, because you're going to play against 3 guys who absolutely are never going to play Dredge and are almost 80% to be on a blue deck.
Menindian's second deck was really indicative of that. He played like 12 artifact hate cards and 0 graveyard hate.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can try to do that at Eternal Weekend. I mean, you can stand there with a shot glass and say, I hope I don't play Dredge tomorrow. Gulp. And
I mean, I would say that anyway, because I don't like playing Dredge.
Right, but I mean, you're essentially just saying before the tournament begins, I'm placing a wager. I'm placing a wager that I'm not going to see Dredge in, let's just say I think last year was 8 rounds. I'm not going to see Dredge in 8 to 9 rounds and have this, super tweaked sideboard, let's say, against other blue decks. But, you will be out of the tournament if you play against Dredge once or twice. So, I think it's fine to make those kind of gambles, but you should definitely just ahead of time write it down and see if you ended up being correct, Anyway.
So we want to run through some decks, or
we've been doing some testing, so I proxied up a whole gauntlet of decks, probably gotten through 30 or 40 matches, give or take, between various combinations, and my gauntlet for, at least keep in mind this is sanctioned vintage, my gauntlet for this is Merfolk. For a number of reasons. I think it's a good deck. A, it's a budget-friendly deck. B, it doesn't suffer too much if you're on the non-power train. My second deck was Blue-Red Delver, and splashing for green. So no Tarmogoyf Delver, similar to some of the vintage Super League decks you've seen that have like 4 Young Money, 4 Delvers.
It's
bolts.
usually green for like 2 Trigon Predator, flashing back Ancient Grudge, and maybe 1 Nature's Claim.
Exactly, yeah. So that style of Delver running Treasure Cruise. Bug, and when I say bug, I mean bug with like a creature base of Clicks, Confidant, Deathrite Shaman, Trigon Predator, no Goyf bug, basically. With Null Rod, Abrupt Decay, the usual, and then a mix of like 8 to 9 other counter spells: Sabotage, Pierce, Flusterstorm, Misstep, etc. Dredge is in our gauntlet, and this is non-Dread return Dredge. I don't, myself and the person who's taking all my Dredge cards to Philadelphia, who's goldfished and played 150 matches now at this point, we're fully convinced that Dredge with spells is awful. So just quad laser Dredge with 4 Leyline main, 4 Unmask, 4 Icarids. No bullshit. And I think going that route really ensures that you're going to win the first game, because the deck mulligans way better. And it's just, the game plan is so much more streamlined for game 1, which is the game you should absolutely be winning like 100% of the time.
Because most decks are going to be bringing in minimum 4, probably closer to 7 pieces of graveyard hate.
Yeah, exactly. And the Dread Return version just, it gets worse hands. It has dead cards like Middle Misstep. Really, there's no reason that we could come up with to run that version if you're running the quad laser version with 4 Leyline, 4 Unmask main. And I think Black Leyline now has probably got more utility in non-Dredge matchups than it ever has, and we're finding that out. Like, it's great against shops with Crucible, who could normally lock you out of the game with a Sphere and 1 Wasteland and a Crucible. It's great against the Treasure Cruise decks, which runs Snapcasters.
Seems to me you also have one little side effect is people are starting to actually play removal now. So if you're dread returning something and it's just getting swords, that's pretty awful for you.
Yeah.
And then you talk about, like we've mentioned a couple times, we think Bug is one of the better decks in the format. If you put a fatty in the yard and you're like, dread return, and they just, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and remove that for the cost of 1 green, that's also pretty rough on your deck. It
is, and our Bug deck is running a main deck Scavenging Ooze too, because that card's gotten really good because it's awesome. Yeah. So that's our Dredge gauntlet. We're not even bothering with spells because they suck. Tezzerator and just blue-black big Tezzerator is another deck in our gauntlet. I think there's something to be said for just going way over the top of these little Pyromancer derp decks that want to attack, and just trying to win the game as quickly as possible with Vault Key. I think in the Vintage Super League, instead of going big Tez or Turbo Tez, a couple people chose to play Steel City Vault, which is, the end game is the same. It's just trying to assemble Vault Key as quickly as possible. It's
more like a combo deck than a control deck.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah. And we also wanted a Mana Drain deck in our gauntlet just to see how Mana Drain works against the new 8 casting cost spells. And so anyway, there's that. Shops, and the shop deck that I've been playing is a control shop deck with 12 spheres, 13 spheres. And I'm playing Coercive Portal, and I'm playing Karn, and I'm playing Metamorphs. I'm not playing Tangle Wire, and I'm not playing Null Rod's main. And the reason I'm not playing Null Rod's main is because I'm walking into a sanctioned Vintage tournament where there's going to be a lot of decks that are playing Null Rods. Merfolk, Bug, Blue-Red Delver doesn't...
There's going to be people prepared for Null Rod, and there's going to be people unaffected by Null Rod.
Exactly, yeah. So that Blue-Red Delver deck just might as well play Null Rod. And Land Still. There's some other decks that really just don't care.
If you want a strong example of that, there are a couple of people talking about, like, I don't think you need Black Lotus in this deck for, like, 2 or 3 decks.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's a conversation ever is kind of mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, no, it's true. And the Terra Nova deck that Chris Picula played actually eschewed Black Lotus, which I don't necessarily think is right, but you can at least come up with 2 or 3 bullet points to justify it. First of all, he was playing Null Rod, but the 4% that you're going to draw it in your opening hand, maybe isn't worth drawing it later, is I guess his feeling towards it. So anyway, my shop deck is that. I'm playing Karn, I'm playing Coercive Portal. The card is pretty crazy in testing. It's fine in your opener. It's fine on the 3rd turn. It doesn't affect the board. I get that, but you could probably say that about, another 15 cards in shops. What I'm finding is that Coercive Portal just is a nail. In games that have sort of reached equilibrium, it almost always wins. And then in B, in games where you have a decided advantage, it's almost impossible to lose when you've got Howling Mine in your shop deck, because you take the one thing that can cause a shop deck to lose, which is awful top decks, out of the equation. You're just Howling Mining yourself. And it's also worth noting that it's good with Karn. If you land Karn, you have a bunch of Nettletooth Djinns. So that's the shops deck we have in our gauntlet. And then finally, it's not sanctioned, it's sanctioned vintage, so we decided to put like a junk hate deck in our gauntlet just to see how it plays out, and it's actually been pretty decent. So that kind of is our gauntlet. I'm not playing Grixis Control. I don't really have any of the Grixis lists. I think LSV has a Grixis list that's he's running this week in the Vintage Super League, and it's actually running the new Dig Through Time card, and it's it's maybe something that people will copy. I'm not sure. I guess it's not even...
Grixis is in a weird place right now, so I think that there probably will be a fair amount of people who are just going, I want to play Grixis Control, I don't know what to play, and they will copy that or another deck list.
It's tough to even call it a control deck. He only has like 3 win conditions, so normally I associate decks with 3 to 4 win conditions. I guess he has a Jace with control, but it's also a cantrippy heavy deck that's relying on filling its graveyard. He's got 4 Gush, 3 Dig, 4 Probe, and really his only win conditions are 3 Young Money and I guess a Jace or Dak stealing something, I suppose. So it's tough to even call it control. It's also kind of cantrippy and combo-y, but with only 3 creatures, I find it tough to call it aggro control. Anyway, so there's that, and then maybe we might throw like a Grixis Slaver style deck into the fray as well. But I mean, we're not even like old style Gush Storm, not even in our gauntlet. Blue white, the Restoration Angel deck, I'm not particularly high on that deck. I think I would just as soon play Rest in Peace Control like I played at Gen Con 2013 than play that deck at this point. So that's kind of our gauntlet, and that's what we're gonna try to figure out. So I've got a matrix of those decks, and we've been sort of banging those decks off of each other. And maybe in the show notes I can post some of our results. But that's what I'm looking at. I don't know how that contrasts with what you're seeing online.
Like I said, the online game it's become kind of independent of the regular metagame, and I'll say the one thing that seems really present is probably 30+% of my matchups are against Young Pyromancer decks, which Young Pyromancer is like my favorite card ever printed, which makes the matchup really weird because most decks you just like throw in Pyroclasm and you're good to go, but when you're playing dudes with 1-butts, you have to start looking for weirder stuff like Electrickery.
Caltrops.
Well, you can't play Caltrops because then it hits your own dudes.
Well, I'm not playing that goddamn deck. I'm playing shops.
The mirror match is a very interesting matchup because a lot of times, like if they land a Young Pyromancer and get a couple spells played, it's kind of the end of the game. Yeah,
that's what I've been seeing, and it's in watching the Vintage Super League decks, just sort of watching the card just take games over. Even as you draw bullshit and dead cards and cantrips, you're still winning the game. Is pretty insane.
Yep. The other stuff, like there's just not that much shops online, which I think is partly a result of previous bugs with shops. I guess maybe it's a little more expensive. I don't know. I actually don't know if I've played against shops online at all to have any experience with it right now.
Yeah, I think what we're finding in our gauntlet is that shops is, as usual, really, really good. Other things that are pretty obvious, being on the play, probably puts you up another good 20-25%. I would say one thing we are finding is that the bug shop matchup is pretty miserable. Bug at this point is just I think it's just overwhelmingly a favorite, barring a really broken on-the-play shops draw.
It's really interesting because the bug deck is it's very... Threat light isn't accurate, but it's very answer dense.
Yeah.
While still being able to, you didn't do anything this turn, I'm going to drain you for 2.
Well, there are 2 or 3 cards that on the draw are really miserable to try to deal with from the shop's perspective. The first is Deathrite Shaman. I mean, it's really, really tough to deal with it, especially on the draw for a shop deck. You're also now, I think, in a metagame where the default play of on the play Chalice 0 after maybe laying out some number of Moxen isn't really maybe the default play anymore.
Definitely not as good as Chalice 1 most of the time.
No, and it wasn't always like that. I mean, you had these big blue control decks where their one casting cost spells didn't bother you that much, like Mental Misstep. Who cares? and then their top deck tutors, are few and far between. But now you've got Bolt, you've got all these cantrips, you have Deathrite Shaman, which is nigh unbeatable. You've got other cards like Spell Pierce, you've got Steel Sabotage. So Flusterstorm, which doesn't do anything against my shop deck, so I don't care. But anyway, that decision now has gotten a lot more complicated, especially in the blind. So I've been trying to play by sandbagging a Chalice. I'm playing that a little bit differently than I probably would have 2 or 3 years ago. But I still think after sideboarding, the bug deck has like 20 cards that say blow up an artifact, and it's almost unwinnable, I think. I mean, it's probably down in the 30% range. And so figuring out a way to hedge the sideboard against bug is what we're trying to do now. And it's tough when you want to commit, let's say, 8 Dredge cards to your sideboard. So either A, take a gamble that you won't play against Dredge with your shop deck and really hedge it against, bug and Young Money. Or, that's essentially where we're at right now, or where I'm at anyway with shops. So...
Yeah, it seems there's nothing that really blanks that you can do to really be strong against their whole deck. Like, you can do Incidental Graveyard Hate, helps against Deathrite Shaman, but it doesn't help against, turn 2 Trigon Predator, especially in a shops deck.
Yeah, it doesn't. And cards like Metamorph are good, but still, being on the draw against a Deathrite and not having a Revoker is miserable. Even if you have the Revoker, they have Abrupt Decay, and it just feels like you're losing ground every time they remove one of your artifacts. And you can Crucible lock them, but again, it's really hard when they have Deathrite in play. So, and I'm running Dismember's main and things like that. It's still a tough matchup. So, I'm not sure what we're going to come up with as far as the sideboard goes, but right now that's a really bad matchup. Merfolk's about even. After sideboarding, I'm finding that, I've got 8 dedicated sideboard cards against Dredge, and I'm looking at my matrix.
I'd imagine the lack of islands helps a lot for you.
Yeah, lack of islands helps. Just plain old Sphere helps a lot. When you're only running Thorn in, let's say, a Metalworker build, you're a lot more vulnerable to the Null Rod, A, and then B, they just ignore it and play a bunch of true names and just crush you. So having actual Sphere helps. And being somewhat resilient to Null Rod also helps. I mean, I'm not playing Null Rods in my shop deck, but I'm not playing Forge Master or Metalworker either, so Null Rod's probably a push. Maybe you shut off some of my Moxen and Karn can't, joyride you. But other than that, it's not that big of a deal. I'm probably 60-40 against the Young Money decks, just because still shops and Spheres can just overwhelm such a crappy mana base. I've lost a few games where they get a hot draw with, their Sapphire, and maybe Dak Faden starts, stealing stuff. I've lost those games, but overall,
it
I haven't
seems
had a
to
problem.
me if you can afford it, Tabernacle is really good against the young Pyromancer decks, just because they tend to run on very little mana.
Yeah, their mana base is super light. Tabernacle shuts them down, and from what I've seen online, they're not playing Wasteland. Some of them are on the Gentleman's Strip Mine, but they can't actually waste you out. So yeah, Tabernacle is big in that match.
From my experience, part of the reason they're not playing Wasteland is not just the fact that it's very expensive, but with only one land drop a turn and most of them aren't playing Gush, I would much rather have a Volcanic than I would have you not have a Volcanic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can't necessarily waste lock them, but if I just hit 1 or 2 Volcanics, and then I've got, like you said, if you have a Tabernacle at it, that whole plan gets really difficult. Young Pyromancer becomes miserable. And then played a bunch of matches of the green, white, black hate deck against shops, and as you can imagine, that deck just cleans shops up pretty much constantly. It's also decent. Let's see, we had 6 in favor of junk versus 4 for the Young Pyromancer deck. Just having a ton of removal, like 4 Abrupt Decays and 2 or 3 Swords to Plowshares, was pretty tough for the blue-red Delver deck to deal with because they just don't actually have that many creatures. It's only like a suite of
You're
about...
usually playing 10?
Yeah, 8 to 10. So
4 Delvers, 4 Pyromancers, 2 Trigons usually.
Or some Snapcasters. We had a list that had a couple of Snapcasters, even with Treasure Cruise. So anyway, yeah, that match was actually somewhat favorable. It just suffered against sort of the broken blue decks, and I had a little trouble with the True Name Nemesis. But so that's our gauntlet. I think the influence of Magic Online will be interesting to see. But to your point, it does come down to the real cards that you own, and then, like you said, some people have pet decks. You get a lot of that. And then just being sanctioned, as I've said in weeks past, I think is going to heavily influence the metagame. There are people who will pay the money to play in this tournament just to play in this tournament because it's a blast, who'll just put Merfolk together and pay
just to be able to go.
Just to be able to go and play on Saturday. Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. So or to play on Sunday, excuse me. So yeah.
So, what's your guess then for top say 2 or 3 decks?
Yeah, I think shops. I think non-metal worker shops, and my reasons I've stated before. I feel like the deck's more vulnerable to metal rod, more vulnerable to null rod, more vulnerable to abrupt decay. So I'm staying away from metal worker. I know that it's explosive, but I don't think it's in a good place right now. So I think a more mid-range mana denial shop version with lots of spheres, lots of wasteland effects, and then possibly spoiler card like Coercive Portal. I think is a good bet. I think Bug is a good bet. I think it plays sort of in the middle of everything. Has no completely awful matchups. Can handle Vault Key. Can handle the other creature decks. Can handle shops with a good sideboard. Can handle Dredge. So I think a tuned Bug list with like Scavenging Ooze, maybe Eschewing Tarmogoyf, is
another one little thing about Bug is not very many decks in Legacy, aside from shops, really punish bad mana bases, and Bug does that very hard.
Yeah, Bug
between Wastelands, sometimes a Crucible, being able to Null Rod is pretty painful.
Yeah, and we've actually looked at a few lists that actually run an island and run a forest, or run an island and a swamp. So I think there's room in a Bug list for actually playing a couple of basics and really solidifying your mana base and then attacking there. So I think Bug's in a pretty good place, and it's a deck that rewards tight play, and it's, like I said, I don't think it's got a terrible matchup against anything. And I think Dredge is still a deck to beat. I mean, just playing it, I think one thing people do is they don't spend a lot of time running a bunch of decks up against Dredge because no one wants to play against it. It's not fun. It's miserable.
No one wants to spend their time playtesting as it either. So I think most people just pack a bunch of hate and say this will be enough.
Exactly. Yeah. And what we're finding is, there are games you draw 2 or 3 pieces of hate and you still just lose. So.
I know. The first time I played Dredge in a real tournament, it was like I sideboard something out and I asked the guy there, was like, "What do you think about siding this stuff out?" And he was like, "That's awful because this and this and this is how this works." I was like, "Oh, I just put in graveyard hate and hope to ride it to victory."
Yeah, I think the one thing keeping Dredge from being a real predator, A, is the gentleman's agreement not to play it. B, as you pointed out, people don't tend to want to play with it and practice because A, they can't find anybody to play against, or it's just not that fun. But when you've got somebody who makes 0 mistakes in a game of Vintage Dredge and draws their Bazaar, misses no triggers, misses no opportunity to squeeze a zombie, it's a beast. So I would put Dredge up there. And
don't hurt your city in a bottle.
Well, even that now isn't as bone crushing as it used to be because you're not getting their City of Brass anymore.
Oh, that's true because they're going to be playing Confluences.
Correct. Yeah, I'll post my Dredge deck in the Pimp thread, but it saddened me to remove the signed Arabian City of Brasses from it. But
I bet there will still be people playing Arabian Nights City of Brasses just to not have to play a new bordered card.
Yeah, I mean you could go that direction, but I think that's what the old school tournament on Friday is for. I don't know. You're definitely kicking yourself in the nuts if you're playing City of Brass now with Tangle Wire, maybe a Gentleman's Rishiden Port, and City of Bottle running around. There's almost no excuse to play it anymore unless you plan on lightning bolting somebody with the City trigger on a stack and winning a game. And if you do, you should probably get some kind of achievement unlocked, old school achievement unlocked, and you should get a prize. So those are the decks I think have a shot. And I think Oath maybe isn't in such a great place anymore. I think there's just a lot of abrupt decay. Maybe Oath.
There's a lot of Grafdigger's Cage as well.
Yeah, a lot of Cage. Maybe
I went to go order some more of those, and I couldn't believe how expensive that card has gotten. Like, it's not expensive, but I couldn't believe it was more than 50 cents.
Yeah. Everybody needs to own 4. I haven't put Oath in my gauntlet. I think it's a flaky deck sometimes. It looks like such a beast when it gets Orchard Mox Oath, which you're on about anywhere between 4 and 5% of the time. So it's just a tough deck to gauntlet with because when it gets those beastie draws, everyone thinks it's a world beater. I just think over an 8 or 9 round tournament, maybe it won't be as consistent as it needs to be. I mean, it's powerful, don't get me wrong, but I don't know that I would play
I haven't
Oath.
had much problems with it just because, 4 Force of Will, 2+ Spell Pierce, usually a few Grafdigger's Cage on the side, Nature's Claim main. Usually what ends up happening for me is if they've resolved an Oath of Druids, they're already at like 6 life.
Uh-huh.
Most of the time it's when they resolve an Oath of Druids, it's like the 8th one. Or, I'm sorry, it's like the 3rd or 4th one they've cast.
Right.
I don't know how they cast 8.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they regrow it a few times. etc. But yeah, I agree with you. It's just a tough deck right now to try to, and then its mana base also sucks. It suffers against Null Rod. It runs the full Mox and sometimes Crypt and everything. Mana base is terrible.
It seems there's also a lot of it's not sure what it wants to do. Like, people are playing Storm variants with it, then people are doing the 2 Grizzlebrand just like Storm, but not playing Storm. So they just have 2 Grizzlebrand to draw a lot of cards with. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's fantastic, but a 7/7 flying lifelink with no protection isn't that great.
Right.
And you're going to take 7 every time you draw, and you've got a ton of 1-ofs, so you're probably going to want to draw a lot.
Yeah, and it's sort of taking a step back. The only, we don't have a lot of results, and I guess Ovinogeddon hasn't posted their results, but we don't have a ton of paper vintage results to go by. We had an LCV in October, which is sort of as of the recording of the show anyway, is the latest big-ish tournament that's happened, and that was on the 11th of October. And that was an interesting result. I'm going to paste it in the chat here so that you can look at it. It was sort of an interesting result, and these guys are all pretty good vintage players in the LCV. They play a lot of sanctioned vintage. So Tezzerator ended up winning that with no cons cards, but he's got 5 basic islands in his Tezzeret control deck. So, super impervious mana base, 1,000 counter spells. I'm not sure how many. 2 misdirection style big Tez. So.
I would not be surprised to see less misdirection now with the cons cards that can't be misdirected.
Yeah, that's true. You can't misdirect either of them. He's got 2 Notion Thieves in his sideboard. That's worth noting, as well as Massacre. I guess that's his answer to your Young Money is to actually pay 2 black. I don't know why he's got Massacre in his sideboard.
With the Lotus, that's not too hard.
Yeah, I guess it's all right. Your blue-red Delver deck finished second. They split the top. And I think there were 2 other Pyromancer decks. 1, 2.
There's one in the top 4, then another Tez in the top 4. Demon Oath, Junk, Ant, Portal Mud is the top 8.
Yeah, Portal. Look at that. Somebody's picking up the Coercive Portal train as well. Yeah, and then check out this awesome Dredge deck. It has no Serum Powders and runs actual Careful Study. Wow.
I like it.
Yeah,
it's even called Powderless Dredge.
And then more Young Money. And then another big Tez deck. He's calling it Planeswalker Control, but any deck with 3 Tezzeret Seekers is big Tez to me.
I'm definitely excited to watch.
Yeah,
see what happens.
So anyway, looking at that kind of setup, I think it kind of falls in line with what I'm talking about. I don't see any bug here, but that would be the other deck I would consider sort of the deck to beat. So we're also testing a little bit with like Noble Fish. I thought that deck, because it has access to like Rest in Peace, all the removal, a pretty good creature.
I guess
suite.
You could probably main deck Rest in Peace. Would be pretty nuts.
Yeah, main deck and Rest in Peace wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but our setup right now has a couple of Spell Snares main, and then the full suite of Meddling Mages in the sideboard, and then Rest in Peace.
I got hit with a what's it called? Mana Leak out of a blue-white deck earlier this week.
Yeah, Mana Leak is definitely
surprisingly
playable.
Strong.
I played Mana Leak in 2013 Gen Con in my blue-white Rest in Peace Helm deck, and it was awesome. I mean, any Fetchland Island and Mox that's basically a hard counter, and it was just fine. So that's kind of my setup. I think those are the decks to beat. It's going to be awesome. I don't anticipate that I'll actually play Legacy this year, so I'll probably play in the prelim on Saturday, and so I'll try to take good notes, and hopefully I'll have an interesting report on Eternal Weekend after I come back. So
I will probably be trying to watch all of the matchups that are on camera just to get to see it.
Yeah, cool. And then
we so infrequently get to see real vintage, and I mean, even online, there's so many problems. Like I said, that's not exactly real vintage watching online.
Yeah, it's a little bit inbred, but and it's worth noting also, if you are going to GP New Jersey, they have set aside, and they do have a scheduled vintage event, I believe. So
currently, I am awaiting. I have a judge call for slow play on my boss giving me that time off, but I'm hoping to go.
Okay, and then another thing worth noting is, and I don't even know if I should announce this, but GP Nashville, which is the week after Eternal Weekend, actually has a Vintage for Full Trip to Gen Con event, which I'm going to drive up and fucking hopefully demolish. But it's a vintage event.
Is that a proxy event?
No, that's sanctioned vintage for an entire paid trip to Gen Con.
That sounds like you might be playing in like a 6-person tournament unless a lot of people hear about this. I better go ahead and delete this from the cast.
Yeah, well, that's a quality expected value then, because they're willing to pay airfare and then your ticket and then your hotel to Gen Con, which is
That's got to be close to $1,000 easily. in value.
yeah. Oh, at least $1,000. Yeah, if your plane ticket's $300-400, then it's probably more like $1,500, and your ticket and your 4-day pass. So there's actually a legacy for Gen Con and a vintage for Gen Con. I'm only playing in the vintage for Gen Con, but anyway, if you're
I do not see an announcement about that on.
it's at gpnash.com.
Yeah, but I'm just mean like I'm not hearing anyone talking about it. So I guess right now it's probably going to be super good expected value because no one knows about it.
Yeah, perhaps, and people will sign up at the last minute, and if they don't have power with them, then hopefully I'll be able to crush
I mean,
them with
I
broken
would
cards.
not be surprised to if I didn't have power on me and I found out about that event. I would have no problem playing my standard deck just out of pure hope.
Shop, Mox, Lodestone, Go Home, Go. Try to beat me with your Pack Rat deck.
Hey, Pack Rat sees play in vintage occasionally.
Yeah, it is. It is a control card in vintage. So,
All right, let's
cool.
wrap this up. We're getting a little long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I basically had nothing to contribute, so I mean,
Well, hurry up and start playing vintage, Matt.
I am playing vintage, but slowly.
Well, play more.
You should just play Notion Thief main deck. That card's insane.
Just start staying up late, and you can stream with me, and we'll play Magic Online, and you can tell me how to play Young Pyromancer incorrectly. All right, cool. Well, thanks for showing up, everyone.
Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed
good
it.
times. Feedback is always appreciated. Email us at everydayeternalcast@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/everydayeternalpodcast, or follow us on Twitter at eternalmtg.